Alright, so today I'll be explaining what visibility of system status is. So this principle emphasizes keeping users informed about what is happening within a reasonable time frame. So a good example of this is the buffering screen. So whenever an app is loading, say an app is loading for a long time, it's not just going to bring you to a static screen where all you see is white or maybe a couple of minutes later, and then it might transfer into or transition into the buffering screen. The goal is to send the user to the buffer screen as soon as the page is loading to inform and allow the user to know what is happening within a reasonable time frame. So they don't think that it's something wrong with their device or it's something that they've done wrong. Now, the second thing is providing clear and continuous feedback to users on the status of their actions, right? And a good example of this would be if you go to an ATM and you're depositing money, you don't, if I was to deposit money, usually it'll say deposited 250 or so it'll say successfully deposited $250 into your checking account, right? But what if it doesn't tell me that? What if it doesn't tell me the status of my action? And instead, after I deposit the money, it doesn't give me no confirmation. Confirmation is like the same thing as status. I don't know what happened. I have to assume that it went into my account, but there was no confirmation. I don't know if it was successful or if it failed. So it's always important to provide clear and continuous feedback to users on the status of their actions because this also applies to applications and websites. And lastly, is ensuring that the system communicates what's going on in a way that the users can understand. Right? So who are the users? The users is your target audience. Right? So if you're going to communicate a problem, right, to uh let's just say, well, for this example, it'll really be any generation, but let's just use the older generation for example, right? If you have a error message, you wouldn't use this filter little resource uh blocked by admin, right? You wouldn't use this type of error if you have an application that the target audience is older people. You would try to use a error message that is very simple, very easy to understand, so that the users can know what's happening or and know how to fix it. Right? So the system communicates what's going on in a way that the users can understand. Right? Just using a universal error message, but also explaining how to fix and what exactly happened. Right? Now, secondly, is the second principle is the match between the system and the real world. So a good design should mirror the language and thought processes of the users. It should speak their language and use concepts and terms familiar to them from the real world. Well, what does that mean? Right. So the first sentence says a good design should mirror the language and thought processes of the users. Ask yourself, who are the users? Right. A good way to kind of look at this is your application, is your website, whatever you're making, is it targeting the younger generation or the older generation? Right. The younger generation, you have to remember, is more tech savvy, and the older generation is not. So when I say mirror the language and thought processes of the users, what I mean is, say for example, you was to create a application for medicine management for the older generation, right? You don't. You don't want to use words like dashboard and things of that nature because they might not know exactly what a dashboard is because they're not as tech savvy. Now, even though it's universal, you might want to consider using simple terms so that they are not confused and they know exactly how to get to different tabs or what different tabs hold. So you might say medicine history, or you might say you might just have a tab that says medicine, prescriptions, something like that, just to tell the user exactly what is in that tab. Right? I'm speaking their language. Now, if you're talking about the younger generation, then you can have a dashboard. You can use names that they were supposed to use, the terminology that we're actually supposed to use. So basically, a good design should mirror the language and thought processes of the users. Just make sure that you have the target audience in mind when you're developing your application. And then you're also implementing the application with the target audience in mind. Now, the second one is the system's behavior should be predictable and follow patterns that matches the user's expectations based on their previous experiences in the real world. Right. So, what does this mean? This means that when you go to application, whatever whatever button that you press should be based on real experiences in the real world. If I press on a button in the real world, when you press on a button, it goes to that page, to that specific page, right? But let's just say that we're using a poor example. In this example, it doesn't go to that page. It might actually take you outside of the app, which makes no sense. But it's not being predictable, nor is it following any patterns. It's being unpredictable because that's not usually what buttons do. Buttons usually take you to the pages and not take you outside of the app, if that makes sense. Right? So you don't want to confuse your customers or who's ever downloading your application or viewing your website. You want to make sure that your application is predictable. All the buttons go to the pages that's supposed to go to. And if you have features inside the application, you want to make sure that the features act as they would in real life. If there is if you have let's say, for example, an application that you can remotely turn on your light bulb using your phone. A good example would say, I can turn on this light bulb by tapping the light bulb on the app. Now it makes sense, right? But let's just say, for example, or let's use another good example. Let's say you tap on the light bulb to turn it on, and then you can slide a slider to change the intensity of the light. That would make sense. That would be a good example, right? A poor example might be, okay, I got to use 3 fingers to tap on the light bulb to turn it on. That's not predictable, nor does it make sense. It doesn't follow any patterns that matches the user's expectations based on previous experiences in the real world. So you want to make sure that everything makes sense, that it's predictable, and that it follows the patterns, so it's not confusing to the user. And then lastly, icons and symbols used in the system should be easily recognizable and have clear meanings based on real world objects or concepts. So let's use this for example. The gear icon on applications, on phones. This is universally known as the settings. No matter if it's an app, no matter if it's a website, no matter if you're just on your phone, if you see this gear icon, it usually has something to do with some type of settings, right? So we can agree that this is easily recognizable and have a clear meaning. But what if I am designing a plants application, right? And I wanted to make the settings for the application a tree. That's cool, honestly, but does it make any sense? Is it easily recognizable? Does it have a clear meaning? No, it doesn't. So, in your application, it is okay to be creative, but you also have to make sure that you're not confusing the users by maybe being a little too creative. And just make sure that your icons and the symbols that you use is easily recognizable and that familiar, definitely to the target audience that you are dealing with.